Right, so today I want to make a video on this story published by the BBC, and I wanted to make a video on it because I never seen this when it originally came out, which was actually over a year ago, and I seen it reposted, so I wanted to make a video about it because it's an important issue, and I think it clarifies and sheds light on one of my positions on this kind of stuff. But um, it's titled Sweden Rape Most Convicted Attackers Foreign Born, and it comes from the Swedish national TV. So I don't see much reason that they have to lie about something like that. If anything, they have all the incentive in the world to lie the other way. So I mean, anyone making that claim, I don't see that as credible in any way, shape, or form. Because if they're a national TV broadcaster, they have every incentive in the world to go along with the social norm, and the social norm in the West is diversity great. The only reason that you would question it is because you're a racist, basically. Um, but the exact number they say is about, well, not exact number, but about 58% of men convicted in Sweden of rape and attempted rape over the past 5 years were born abroad, according to data from the Swedish national TV. And there's a lot of aspects of this that I wanted to talk about, but I don't want to make the video too long. And there's so many aspects that I'll probably forget about them because when I make these videos, I'm just talking off the top of my head. I don't have notes or anything. But the first aspect that I wanted to shed a little bit of light on is, where are all the feminists? Like, where are all the feminists? Again, you claim to care so much about rape culture, and even though white Western European men are of the least rapey of any group of men out there, and in the West we have one of the lowest. I mean, at least especially compared to third world countries, we're the most respectable society to women. Um, but yet they still complain, and I think that just goes to show just how good they've got it, and it's gotten to their head. And it's the same thing as the public school teachers, is that they have it so good for so long that they don't realize it, and it's gotten to their head, and they've internalized it, and they're going to complain even though that they've got it a lot better than they realistically should. But that's another issue. um, and that's the same thing for feminists, I guess. But like I said, like, where are you feminists? Like, you claim to care so much about patriarchy and all this kind of stuff, and yet a Middle Eastern culture is as patriarchal as any society could possibly be. Like, women have little to no rights depending on the country, and like I say, some countries they literally have no rights. They literally are treated as second class citizens. They're literally as bad or worse than all of the worst feminist straw man attack things that they can think of in Canada. And yet the overwhelming majority of, especially men from these cultures, want to have a society similar to wherever it is they came from. I mean, similar to a Islamic, Middle Eastern culture, which is patriarchal. Like I don't get it. Like, where are you guys? Like, but the reason that they're not up in arms getting into that is people are wondering, well, I thought they care about women's rights. Well, no, they don't actually care about women's rights. Number one, because I mean, almost all of the stats they cite are BS. Almost all the stuff that they're fighting for, it's more. The other thing too is that feminists think the least of women of pretty much any group in society, because feminists, not all of them, but at least especially the modern ones. That's the other thing too. When you talk about feminism, people think about, like, 50 to 100 years ago and all, like, those kind of feminists. Well, no, that's couldn't be anything further from the truth. Feminists nowadays and feminists back in the day are drastically different, at least on average. Obviously, there's exceptions, but on average, number one, they're not fighting for anything. I mean, nothing they're fighting for. I mean, you have the gender pay gap, which is completely made up. You have, I mean, look at most of the stuff they complain about. It's like the temperature is set too low. Um, women aren't getting the same amount of STEM degrees, even though them and all their feminist friends are all taking gender studies degrees. Like, if you think it's such a big issue, go try and get a STEM degree. But they don't. They just complain. So, like I said, all these issues they complain about, they're not actually issues. They're all issues that can be easily explained when you actually look at more into the data. It's that women make different decisions that leads to the difference in outcome. There's very little bias. I was reading a book the other day, and of all the I think there's been over 100 lawsuits in the U.S. over, I don't know what exactly the amount of period of time it is, but and they're lawsuits based on employer discrimination based off a statistic, not off actual tangible cases of clear discrimination. They're like, you know, women are, less than 50% of executives, or less than 50% of engineering degrees, people that get engineering degrees or stuff like that. And of all those cases, none of them have gone through. In other words, it's safe to say that whenever people point out a statistical difference between men and women when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's bunk. It's almost always, in fact, in this case, always, but I'm sure there is an exception to this, but at least up to this point, we haven't found an exception that when women and men have, differences in outcomes, it's always explained away that women just make different choices. So that's about it with the whole feminist part. And like I said, like, they don't actually care about women's rights. They're generally, it's the same as the climate change people. They're generally just useful idiots for socialism. And I know it's tough to put it that bluntly, but I'm someone who, if there's a bluntly way of putting it, I'm gonna say it that way, because there's no other way of saying it. And people on the left aren't afraid of doing that to people on the right. So that's the one thing I can't stand. And if there's a way of putting it like that, it isn't true. I'm not gonna say it like that, but if it is, it is. The other thing too is that the whole diversity part of it. And in the West, we have, namely Justin Trudeau at the forefront of it. And in Canada, we have even, other, mainstream organization and groups that always go on and on and on. Diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength. And number one, it's not true when you look at it statistically. Diversity creates less social trust. It creates, kids less likely to go outside and play with each other and all that kind of stuff. Creates more bullying, all this kind of stuff. And you can look at studies, namely the Putnam ones. I know is the most I wouldn't say famous, but the one with the most notoriety, that shows that the more diverse an area it is, the less social trust happens, the less people become friends, all this kind of stuff. And I know nowadays you look at, compared to back in the day, 2-3 generations ago, people, especially men, identify as having less and less friends. Well, I wonder why. And I'm not saying that, the one thing I would throw out here before is, I'm not saying that there's no possible way of having diversity. My position on this is somewhat not set in stone, but I would say that we can have diversity, but it has to be on a much, much smaller scale than what it's currently on. And the people that we would bring in need to be coming for the freedoms to work. And I would stress, when they're coming to work, it needs to be because we have a surplus of jobs, not that they're going to take a job that a native Canadian or American or whatever wants. So, I mean, I know in the U.S. they do have a surplus of jobs in a lot of sectors, and basically meaning that there's more jobs than there is people applying for them. So yeah, in a case like that, we can have some immigration. But in Canada, we have mass unemployment. We have automation coming into. That's the other problem with bringing in immigrants from the third world, is they tend to not be as intelligent on average. I would stress, like I said, I'll say it again, stressing on average. And the problem is, the first jobs that get automated are the ones that people that tend to have lower intelligence work. So we're bringing in all these immigrants from the third world. Maybe they have a job right now, which they're less likely to work than the average Canadian or American. But let's just say that they do have a job. Well, 10, 20 years down the road, it's a lot more likely that their job's going to be automated away. And what happens? Well, they're on welfare. And that's just another person that's net negative on society. And the problem is that the rate that we're currently going at is already unsustainable. Bringing one more person in that's a net negative makes it even more unsustainable. So that is kind of a big issue. And like I said, getting back to the whole diversity is our strength. And I know I've made videos about this before, but I got to keep making videos about it because too many people still don't understand this. The left doesn't even, or I mean, it's typically the left saying this, but there's some people on the right, but it's mostly the left. But let's just ignore the political leanings of it. You have all these people talking about how diversity is our strength. Well, they don't actually believe that. And there, like I said, there's two groups of people when it comes to this kind of thing. There's the everyday diversity is our strength touter or person that talks about it, which they're just repeating what they've heard because it's virtue signaling. They feel good to say it and all this kind of stuff. And you have the politicians like the Justin Trudeau's of the world that are just doing it to get more personal power and more personal praise. I mean, they're virtue signaling too, but the difference is that the everyday person talking about this kind of stuff, like the climate change activists, like the feminists, they're just useful idiots for the cause because the people at the top don't actually believe what they're saying. If Justin Trudeau actually believed in diversity as our strength, well, he would point out areas that conservatives are underrepresented or white men are underrepresented, namely college campuses. I don't know an area off the top of my head that white men are underrepresented, but I'm sure there is some of them. I guess suicide would be one. Men are the overwhelming majority of suicides. Where are all these people talking about it and how we need to get that number down? Men are the overwhelming majority of homeless people. Where are all these people talking about how we need to get that number more even? So they don't actually care about diversity. And like I said, if they do, they would believe in diversity, even in areas where they would stand to lose, because if more conservatives are on college campuses, well, that's less leftist, people that can indoctrinate people into leftism, basically. And the other thing too is that a lot of these college professors, they're not everyday run-of-the-mill liberals. On most campuses, I've seen the numbers show that there is more communist or Marxist professors than there is conservative. So there's more far left as can possibly be professors than there is run-of-the-mill conservatives. And like I said, if they actually cared about diversity, they would point that out and they would try and get it, addressed. But they don't. They only care about it when they stand to gain. So they don't actually believe in diversity as our strength. And if they actually believed in it, they would do something about areas that people that disagree with them are underrepresented. So that's basically the gist of it. The last thing being is that, like, paying for this kind of stuff is off the charts. Like I said, in Canada, and I mean basically every Western country, but Canada is a pretty bad one. We currently can't afford what it is we're currently doing, and bringing in all these people that, on average, like I want to say, stress on average, are more likely to be criminals, are more likely to be on welfare. All this kind of stuff is only making the problem worse. And the last thing I'll point out is that, like I have to point out in all these videos, but it's okay to judge a group of people differently when they act differently. Everybody does it, and no one in their right mind thinks that it's not okay. Like I said, the best example being is that if you disagree with that, well, then you should be at the forefront of going after insurance companies for charging young men more for car insurance. But no one does that because everyone knows that young men cost more, are more likely to be in accidents. You don't get DUIs, all that kind of stuff, and thus it's okay to charge them more on average. And the same thing being, if refugees and immigrants from the third world are more likely to, whether it doesn't matter what color they are more likely to become criminals, then it's okay to judge them differently. Now, like I say, I need to stress for the 50th time, it seems like, this video, going up to an individual without knowing or not whether or not they're a criminal or on welfare or any of this kind of stuff would be wrong. That would be racist. But going up, when the government's proposing bringing in 100,000 of these people, or 200, 300,000, like in Canada, then it's okay to say, hey, these people are more likely to be, rapists, more likely to be on welfare. We currently can't even afford how we're living right now. How are we going to afford an extra 10, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 people? They're going to be drains on society. Okay, so there's no one can argue that. I don't care if you disagree with me on on the number of people we should be bringing in. You can't argue with the point I just made. So I've talked enough on this issue. Like I said, you have all these people that, like I say before, and you have these people that they go in the comment section and they're like, "Where's your proof that immigrants are more likely to be on welfare? Where's your proof that immigrants are more likely to be rapists or criminals?" Well, I've made, like I said, it shows that you literally watched like the first half of my video and you shut it off and you threw your comment in. Like, if you actually look through my other videos, it wouldn't take you long to find ones like this. And I've made videos on the more likely to be on welfare. I'm going to keep making those videos. I've made many videos like this. And like I say, here is my proof. All right, here's the proof. And like I said before, right at the start of the video, and I'll leave it here, the Swedish national TV has no reason to be biased. Like, absolutely no reason, because the if the first place that you would look for people to be biased is the social norm. Like I say, CBC, CTV, and Global, they're biased. How are they biased? Towards the social norm. They're going to lie and say diversity is our strength because that's the social norm. People believe that stuff. They're going to lie and say climate change is this big issue because that's the social norm. They're going to lie and say, gun control is great. They're going to lie and say free healthcare is awesome. They generally are clearly biased to the left because the left is giving them tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of dollars. So the first place you would look for to see a bias is where can they benefit socially, from the virtue signaling perspective, and financially. And they're not going to. I mean, it is possible. I will admit that it is possible, but it's much, much less likely. So I'm going to leave it there. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.